Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of our ongoing Q&A number 22, I believe it is. I'm excited to be with you. My name is Kevin Eikenberry, and I'm answering questions that people have asked us about remote work and remote leading over the last few weeks. These questions all came into me last week. But if you're with me here, then my hope is that you have questions and you will share them, because I'd rather answer yours live and make sure that we're getting you what you need and come back to the others or add to the others. So I have 4 that I'm going to answer and can answer yours as well. I hope you will do that. I have an able assistant with me today. Her name is Marissa. Marissa?
Hello.
There she is. She'll be watching LinkedIn to make sure that we get everything we want. I'm putting my glasses back on so I can see everything that I need to see. And as I'm getting ready to put the first question up there, let me just say this. If you haven't been to our portal that we created now over 4 weeks ago to help remote leaders and remote workers be more successful with a tremendous amount of free resources, and my able assistant, Marissa, who you heard say hello a minute ago, has been very involved in the creation and the continuing to update of this site, kevineikenberry.com/COVID-19, where you can get all sorts of resources to help you, including recordings of all the past episodes of this Q&A series. So that's that. I have 4 questions, and I'm going to dive in. And the first one is, Eloy asked me this question. With working remotely, any advice besides things like attitude with doing different tasks that you're not accustomed to doing? Well, it's interesting to me that this question comes up for a couple of reasons, because the longer we get into this whole episode of more people working remotely, the more the questions they have a remote component or a remote flavor, but the questions are really about work in general and just, well, how does it different when it's remote? And so I want to talk about this, as it's a great question. A lot of times we're getting asked to do work remotely now because someone else isn't available, or someone else is maybe has been furloughed. Someone else is, for some reason, this is not a task we've done before, or this is a task that is completely different because we're doing it remotely. Either way, I think we start with where we would do this with anything, and that is figuring out what are the resources that we need, what is the information that we need, and who do we need to talk to. So while that might be harder to do at some level remotely, fundamentally, you need to be willing to ask for help and reach out to people that you know have done it or might be able to give you some help in doing it. Also recognize that you may need more time from the supervisor, but not just the supervisor. Who's done it before? Is there a checklist? What do we know that we can use to apply with this? So the thing is that if you're being asked to do tasks you're not accustomed to doing, take a deep breath, realize that you'll get through it, you'll figure it out, and then really tap into the rest of the team. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask for help. And in fact, people will probably be very willing to help you, especially in this time. So I would say my general advice would be take a breath so you can say, hey, I'm going to try to have the confidence to do this successfully. And I'm going to focus on finding out what I need to learn from the people around me that can help me in some way. Now, I was talking with Marissa just a few minutes before we went live, and we were asking something, and she says, well, why don't you just Google it? Which I did. And the reality is that don't forget those kinds of tools too. Look to your team, look to others that have done it, look for a process, look for a checklist, and perhaps this is your chance as you're doing it to create that that checklist or that process document that may help not only you but others in the future. So I think the biggest difference here is that the people that you might think to ask won't be as easy to ask. So you're going to have to reach out, be willing to do that, use whatever communication tools are appropriate to do that. And don't be afraid to ask the question more broadly, because you may not know who has the knowledge or experience. Say, hey, who on the team has done this before, could help me, or could give me some guidance, or could give me some feedback, or take a look at the first draft, or whatever. That would be my advice here. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's go to the next question. Franke asked this question. He asked this question from Germany because I know who this is, and I'm hoping he actually watches this later. He said, Kevin, do you have any specific tips or tricks or games or tools to help virtual meetings more interesting or interactive. And this is probably a webinar that we could do. There's lots of things that we could do in this regard. Some of these past episodes of this Q&A, I've talked about this a little bit. So let me just give a couple of other ideas. I'll share something that I did with our team yesterday. And that is that I did what we called a gratitude circle. And I just had everyone on the team share one thing that they're grateful for, even in all of the mess that we're in. What's one thing that we're grateful for? And I went first, picked someone else, and then asked that person to pick someone else. And we went until everyone had done it. It took us maybe 4 or 5 minutes. It raised the energy in the group. It gave us all something to be grateful for. It helped us get a little bit insight into what people were finding helpful or are grateful for in that particular time. And I think it was well worth our time. I would always say that whenever we are in a place of feeling more grateful, it is helping and bolstering our attitude. It's changing our approach. It is helping us feel better and have more self-confidence. So anytime that we can create a chance for gratitude, it's good. I think right now it could be a really good time to do it. Now, 12 people on our team, that's how we did it. If you had 30 people, you probably wouldn't do it with all 30. You'd figure out another way to do it. I will say this, that there are people that are going to some extremes here to create interaction and make their Zoom meetings better. I didn't type it in here to give it to you, but if you just Google GOAT to meeting, I won't say any more than that. GOAT to meeting, and you can actually have a GOAT join your Zoom call. Now, I love the entrepreneurial spirit of that, but it's kind of silly. Like, we ought to be able to come up with ways to entertain ourselves and engage ourselves in meetings. And another thing I would say is that we can make them more interactive by, just like any meeting that might not be very interactive, which means this. If you've been in meetings where everyone's sitting on their hands and not doing anything, if you made those more interactive, they'd be better meetings, right? So the same thing is true for our virtual meetings. There are certainly differences, but the first thing I would say is make a clear expectation that this is going to be a meeting where we want your participation. If you have a clear agenda for the meeting that you've sent out ahead, which I did not succeed with in the meeting that I led with my team yesterday, but if you did and when you do have an agenda, people know what to expect, they know how to come prepared, and it's more likely that they will interact as well. Now, if you want their input, don't be afraid to ask for it, especially in a virtual meeting. You may need to be a little more directive in terms of asking for feedback or input. Notice even in my simple little gratitude circle exercise that we did, that I created a way to make it interactive, because not only did I ask everybody to do it, but I had the group basically decide who comes next by saying, you go, and then you tell us who's next. Everyone's got to kind of be ready. I don't know who's going to pick me. I don't know when it's going to be my turn. And so that adds a little bit of lightness, but it also keeps everyone on the edge of their seat, ready to go, and they can't be sort of sitting back, checking their phone or whatever else. So I would encourage that. There are all sorts of games, again, some of which I've shared on past sessions, but the main thing I would say is this. Do the things that make for better meetings, and then transfer those things to virtual meetings. If your meetings, pardon my language, sucked before, they're probably sucking more now virtually. So if you're saying, well, I'm just trying to make them better, all that is really good, but recognize that if you know some things that worked well before, tweak those and use those. That would be my first thought. Also, and I also don't have this link, but if you go to LinkedIn and you go to LinkedIn Learning and type in virtual meetings, you will find a course that I created with LinkedIn that currently, I believe, is still available. If you're not a LinkedIn professional member, premium member, or if you don't work for an organization that has purchased LinkedIn Learning, I believe it's still one of the free courses that they've put together. So leading virtual meetings. If you see my smiling face on the video, you know you found the right thing. And probably, I believe that you will find it's still free. You can't beat that. Again, there's a whole webinar there of things that we could do, but hopefully there's a few things that will help you. I don't see any other questions or comments at this point, but I will say, if you If you're just now joining me, feel free, ask your questions, say hello, tell us where you're from. We'd love to know that as well. Interact with us, please. So kind of what I'm just practicing what I'm preaching by encouraging you to participate a little bit, even though this isn't a meeting, right? But just like a virtual meeting, you may say, well, I don't really want to say anything. It's actually safer here because you don't have to actually talk. You can just type, which leads to my next question. Here's the question. Gail said, Kevin, I would prefer to speak on the phone or have a Google meeting or a Zoom meeting or whatever, if necessary, rather than having long typed chats. Gail apparently is not a fan of using instant messaging tools. So her question is, how do I convey that I don't really like that communication approach? Well, I think it's a fair question. And I think that we need, and I actually like the way she's framed the question, because she's not saying, I'm not going to chat. She's saying long typed chats isn't my preference. I would actually say to her that in many cases, it's probably not even the right answer. But the fundamental question that Gail is asking is, can I tell people that I'd like to do it a different way? And the answer is, sure you can. Now, you don't want to do that in a judgmental sort of way or with a judgmental tone that says, listen, why are we wasting our time sending these long chat messages? Why don't we just pick up the phone? You don't have to do that. You can just, first of all, you can just say, hey, do you mind if we get on the phone? And if they say, hey, they don't mind, then no problem. And if they sort of push back, then finish that up and then come back later and say, you know what? I found in that exchange, it would have been easier for me. It would have been preferable for me. I think it might have been faster for both of us if we'd have been on the phone or if we'd have got on our webcams or whatever. So really what you want to do is just use it as a chance to build some agreements with people. So I can tell you this with my team of 11 other, depending on how you count and on which day, 12 other folks, I know that some of them prefer different tools. Some of them love the chat feature. Some of them would rather talk on the phone. Some of them immediately want to use a webcam. I know what their personal preferences are. And when it doesn't really matter, and I think we'll get to the same outcome, I just go with their personal preference. But sometimes the right answer is a specific tool that will get better communication, message sent, message received will work better. And in those cases, I just say, hey, why don't we do this? Now, Gail might be saying, yeah, Kevin, but you're the boss. And that's true. But the real point that I want to make here is that be willing to ask people, be willing to create a conversation about it. Not necessarily in the moment when you're frustrated by having the long chat thing and you're like, I'd be better on the phone. Certainly you can say, hey, could we just pick up the phone and continue this? And they may say yes, and you're great. But even if not, when you're not in that place of being frustrated by it, say, hey, I was thinking about that yesterday, and it seems like we're in a lot of long chat conversations. And could we talk about how we might be able to do that differently? And chances are people will be open to at least the conversation. So that's where I would start. You never know until you ask. What you're really trying to do is come up with some agreement about how you're going to work together. Don't just make it about you. Make it about the work. Okay. All right. Marissa says on LinkedIn, she has a question. So Marissa, I'm going to get rid of this question and tell us what the question is.
So from Christy, she says, what kind of questions can I ask to help assess the needs, professional and personal, of my team?
What kinds of questions? Is that what
Yes.
she's asking? Well, so first of all, open-ended questions. Second of all, I love, Christy, that you're saying personal and professional. So I think in this time, that question sounds like it's coming from you as a leader, Christy. You can confirm that to Marissa if you want. But here's the thing. We need to be doing both of those. We need to be finding out how people are feeling and where they're at and building a sense of where they're at so we can be empathetic with them. That's important. So I love that you're thinking about both sides of that and not just getting to the tasks, right? Let's find out where people are at, the thoughts and feelings before we get to the tasks. And you're going to have to ask questions to do that. And I would say a couple things. They've got to be open-ended questions, which means something that they can answer. And then in other words, some people say, well, hey, are you doing okay? And you get a yes. And they say, well, they didn't really tell me anything. But they answered your question, right? So, hey, how is it going? How are things going? I know that you're trying to teach school while you're trying to work. How's it going? What's going on? So I think you want to first of all, you want to ask open-ended questions. Second thing is, depending on the situation and that person, your relationship with them and what you really want to learn, I would encourage you to plan for those conversations when you can by writing some questions down. Now, if you know you're having a one-on-one, I hold up my journal because I have notes in here for the ongoing dialogues that I have with all my team members. And so for the most part, that stuff's captured here. So if I'm getting ready for a call with Marissa, I might write down the questions. They don't always get in here, but I usually don't just say, here's what I want to accomplish, but I write down what questions will I ask Marissa as a part of the conversation. So if we plan that ahead, that will help. The second thing about the kinds of questions, besides being open-ended, is we want to ask them expectantly, which means we ask and then we pause. And you probably have to pause longer in a video setting, even if it's just one-on-one, than you do otherwise. So in terms of specific questions, it's a little harder for me to answer, but I would say you can certainly say, how's it going? How are you feeling? You can ask it more specifically, like how is wearing the teacher hat going for you? How's your family doing? So you can go lots of different ways there. What are the challenges that you're finding with the work right now? So just be thinking about what it is that you really want to learn, and then ask questions expectantly, open-ended questions, not gotcha questions, not like there's a right answer here and I hope you're going to come up with it, but rather open, expectant questions. And if you're doing it with a group and not with just a single individual, you're definitely going to want to spend and give more people more time to get there. So hopefully that helps, Christy. If it doesn't, or if there's a follow-up, you know what to do. Just type in some more and Marissa will get it to me. So given that, I'm going to go to our last planned question, and it comes from Tom. Tom says, I am really liking working remotely, and I've figured out that I can do all of my job remotely, and it's great. And how do I make the argument to my supervisor or the organization that I continue to do this when everything starts to move back the other direction? Like, I'm expecting they're going to want me to come back, and I'd really like to stay home. Well, I would say a couple things, and part of this is playing with the words that are in the question. But first of all, I wouldn't make it as an argument. I would make it as a conversation, right? And I know that may sound sort of silly, but it's an important piece. Here's the thing that I would do. I would really want to understand, first of all, the way Tom asks the question, can the supervisor make that call, or is it a larger organizational policy issue? So you want to know that, or try to get a sense of that first, right? Second, it's hard to know what any organization is thinking right now about when and how people are going to come back. I think it's very possible that in most cases, there will be more flexibility available for this in the future than there has been in the past. But that's a general statement, not for an individual organization, right? So the second thing is recognize that I wouldn't try to make that argument or have that conversation too early, because in most cases, organizations are still trying to figure out what that's going to look like. They're more worried or concerned right now about when we can start to do it, not how and what we're going to do when that time comes. I would be spending time now trying to get a sense of how they're feeling about how it's working. Make sure that your supervisor feels like you're doing things effectively. Make sure that you're meeting their expectations. In other words, if they see you as doing rock star work, it's going to be way easier for you to convince them to let you stay home and continue to do rock star work. But if they feel like your work hasn't been as effective, or in some way has been compromised, it's going to be harder for you to have this conversation, right? So that's a part of it. But as we get closer, even if you know, so let's just make a couple of assumptions. Let's say that you know that that they're giving you feedback that says, hey, you're doing fine and the work is getting done. But let's say that you know that the organizational bias is probably for you to come back, right? So then what I would want to do is I want to understand what your supervisor's concerns might be, what their resistance might be to that change. How reticent are they, or what are the issues? So in other words, I want to create my conversation. I want to raise the points that I want to make from the perspective of the supervisor and what their needs are and what they're concerned about, not just from our own perspective. Remember, they don't necessarily know the work that you do as well as you do. So they may have assumptions and biases that aren't perfectly accurate. But we don't want to say, listen, you got it wrong. I'm getting everything done. You've got to come at this in a collaborative sort of way. So I want to know where they're coming from, what their concerns and worries are, and then I want to allay those worries as we go. The other thing is, don't feel like you have to get, and of course this depends on the nature of your business and are you using a laptop or what you're doing. The other thing is, be willing to try to settle for some days home, some days at work. In fact, that may be the end goal. Maybe your end goal is, I just want to be able to work from home some of the time. So I wouldn't try to get all or nothing. I'd try to get something. That's kind of the negotiating piece of this, but you need to know where the other person or where the organization is. What I'd be doing now is laying the groundwork, saying, man, hey, I'm really liking this. It's really working for me. Do you have any feedback for me about how it's going? Any concerns that you have about what may be being left out while I'm working from home? So I'd be laying the groundwork now. I'd be trying to understand what their concerns might be, if there are any, and I'd just start it that way. And I think if you do it that way, you set yourself up for the best possible outcomes down the road. So Marissa, I don't see any other notes from you. So I'm assuming there's nothing else from the LinkedIn. Is that correct?
Correct.
Well, guess what that means, everybody? That means we're done for today. 21 minutes in. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to tell you this. I may be live where you are watching me now tomorrow, but it won't be a Q&A. I've got something brewing that I'm hoping I can put together by tomorrow to have a guest with me. But if not, one way or another, in one form or another, next week, if not tomorrow, next week, 12:05 Eastern time, I'll be back here either answering questions or having a guest with me. But I'm excited about whatever it'll be. And I hope that you'll join us or I hope you'll come back. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Marissa, for helping. And I'll just leave by putting this back up. If you are looking for other resources to help you and your team as you're trying to figure all this remote stuff out, including all of the past Q&As in one place, you can go right here, kevineichenberry.com/COVID-19. Hope you'll do that. And I really hope that you will make the rest of your Thursday terrific, that you will be well, that you will be safe, and that you will be remarkable. Thanks, everybody.